Welcome to Local Voices with Michael J. Whelan, Broe, and Brian Kirk, brought to you by South Dublin Libraries as part of our Poetry Day Ireland celebrations. Be sure to check out the rest of our Poetry Day Ireland events throughout the whole day and watch back any events you've missed at South Dublin Libraries YouTube channel. Your libraries may be closed, but we're still here with a whole range of library services, and you can join online right now at www.southdublinlibraries.ie. On behalf of South Dublin Libraries, please enjoy our Poetry Day Ireland event, Local Voices.
Thanks very much, Mark, and thank you to South Dublin Libraries for facilitating this event today for Poetry Day Ireland 2021. I'm delighted to be involved, and I have two marvellous poets as well with me, Michael Whelan and Broe, and we'll be hearing from them shortly. The way the event is going to run is that each of us are going to do a short reading, and then we're going to have a chat or a quick discussion about some issues around the creative process and work that we're working on at the minute. So I suppose without further ado, we'll start off with Michael Whelan. And Michael is an historian and a soldier poet living in Tala in South Dublin. His debut poetry collection, Peacekeeper, was published in 2016, and his second collection, Rules of Engagement, was published in 2019, both of them with Dura Press. You can get more information on Michael from Dura Press website or from his own WordPress website, michaeljwhelan.wordpress.com. So Michael, please, if you don't mind, it'd be great.
Thanks, Brian, for inviting me to take part today. I'll just read three poems from both of the collections, if that's okay. The first one's called Centuries Keep Watch. Inside our wire, a great anthill keeps the curved ground rising. An army breaking the horizon behind the sandbagged wall. We are nothing to it, except when we too seek shelter beneath the tremoring ground and the big guns point our way. Outside the bunker, centuries keep watch, while columns of soldier ants reach far into the future and the past, their long black lines marching up and down the mountain over this defense post, conquering palisades, barbed wire and borders, pouring through cracks in reinforced blast walls, in and out like a two-way shipping route, with the carved up parts of their enemies and the spoil of a million wars. If I was to smash this colony with my rifle, where then would their fair winds take its remains? Would it leave dust on the roof of my mouth, its scouts swarming through my nights in a rage of retribution? This one's called Pristina. It's inspired from something that happened in Kosovo when I was there in 2000. Pristina. It was only a moment, but he looked into me, could see me as clearly as I see him after all this time. His eyes piercing my soul, digging deep. I'm at a main junction in Pristina. My jeep is turning left into the raging river highway, near the barracks flattened by NATO bombers a few months before. I'm counting satellite dishes that seem to overpopulate the high-rise landscape overnight, a sign of normality at last, perhaps. The rusty orange car catches my attention, starting and stopping in a crazy fashion, like a piece of farmyard machinery that hasn't seen a road in years, fueled with kangaroo juice, its driver on the loose. I caught his eyes then, as he lay across the back seat, the agony in his face as they reached out to me, and I saw what remained of his leg, the ball of his knee hanging, attached by loose skin and gristle, and wrapped in a bloody white shirt. Our drivers took control then and sped in opposite directions. I couldn't help him, but I know he sees me, like I can see dead people. So I'll just read one more from Rules of Engagement. It's called In the Periphery. In the periphery, Irish United Nations area of peacekeeping operations during the Israeli-Lebanese Wars 1990s. Shell warning, shell warning, shell warning over the Tannoy. It's 4:30 in the morning. I can feel the distant rumble already. Like an orchestra of activity, we shake the night fever from our heads, grab our weapons, flak jackets, helmets, slide identity discs around our necks. Half dressed, we shuffle like the walking dead towards the bomb shelters. I can feel her heart beating. I am so alive right now. Sense the fruit bats finding their way back into the ruins of the Crusaders' castle. The sound of crickets in the wadi is about me like constellations. I picture the delicate cobweb harpstrings in the corner of my bunk, smell eucalyptus on the air. I know the history of each leaf falling from the cedar tree, the black-faced men in darkened rooms planning war, the pawns who perish in their violence, and I wonder what my parents are doing at this very moment, what time it might be at home if bad news arrives at their door. The stars draw my eyes. The moon vibrates in the periphery as I rush. It's not raining, but a raindrop touches my eyelid, runs down my face. I'm thinking now about her lips, the perfume of her wrists. There is enough time to gather up the local civilians, and so we go. Under flashing lights and blue flags, our troops escort them to the shelters. Soldiers mix with refugees. One or two carry children on their shoulders. Another wraps an infant in her own personal body armor. Yesterday, the resistance attacked the compounds on the hilltops, using the mist for cover. Tank fire and mortars chased them back through the villages. This morning is the occupiers' reprisal. But when the dawn comes, these few innocents will not be seen. They are safe. We will keep them beneath the overcrowded sandbags. At times, the screaming child who rattles my brain makes me want to climb back out for some peace and quiet, an illusion. I close my eyes to see my lover. I imagine the solitude of our garden. I hold on to it. Then comes the rain of fire, the whoops of artillery, the staccato of bullets, and I remember from experience the plumes bursting upwards from their collapsing houses, like pillars of salt rising on the Dead Sea, piling, spilling into the sky along all of their horizons. In this strange cave light, on every vibration, sand sprinkles like gold dust onto a mother's face. I make myself small. We could be in here for hours, even days. I feel so alive, and I ask the universe if it sees the woman waiting for me in the future, who hungers for me, the one I hunger for, my need of her touch. Outside, the gods are deciding who lives and who dies. The shelter keeps the hum of prayers to Christ and to Allah. Fathers feed worry beads through their fingers. Death is prowling the perimeter, and we have no permission to fight. Thank you. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks very much, Michael. That's really powerful stuff. It's great to hear you reading it as well. It kind of lifts it up off the page even more so. But they're really strong poems. I suppose, like, you know, the theme for this year, Michael, as we were saying earlier, is for the Poetry Day this year is new directions, maps, and journeys. And your kind of life, your career has taken you to places that a lot of us would never know anything really about beyond what we read in the newspapers or see on the TV news. And your poetry kind of brings that experience to life in a real way for us when we read it, and especially when we hear you reading it as well. So maybe you might just talk a bit about the kind of the crossover in your work between your work as a soldier, as a historian, as you are as well, and as a poet, and how the three of them merge for you.
Okay, so we're going, as you know, Brian, I'm a long time in the Defence Forces, over 30 years, and 20 years of that I've been working in heritage and history, and my qualification is as a historian as well. So lately, like the last few years, I've been doing oral history, recording oral history, and that's the first time that kind of a project has been introduced into the Defence Forces. And at the same time, my poetry is probably the first time that a serving soldier has written poetry about their experiences. Now, I don't just write about military experiences of other stuff too, but it's a big thing. It's a big part of me. I'm trying to discover what that means actually myself, but I'm rediscovering my own experiences, because it's very hard for soldiers to talk about their experience, but it's easier to write it down sometimes, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a crossover, as I say, between the oral history that I'm recording other people's experiences and my own experiences, and I'm writing it down because it's difficult to orate that in a conversation.
Yeah, I mean, some of the poems like are kind of, if you like, they're public poems. They're about events, big events, but some of them are very private, or even the big public poems have moments, really intense and private and intimate moments in them. And I notice even in the second collection, there's probably, as the collection moves on through it, that there's a sense of the soldier as much as the poet after the events are over, and what's left, you know, in the cold light of day afterwards, and the idea of coming home after living through these kind of events. So there's a more intimate kind of feel to some of the work, I think, in the second. Would that be fair to say? Like,
yeah, well, I think you're right. That's been mentioned to me before. There's more personal stuff in the second collection, Rules of Engagement, because you're like, being a soldier you're lots of different things. It's a one word, but you're lots of things within that term. Look, I'm also a father, a son, I'm a brother, and I have parents and all that, you know. So my experience derives from your family and the people in your periphery, but also it reflects on them too, you know. So I'm a soldier 30 years, I'm 51 years old, but I had a life before I became a soldier, but all that led into that experience. And there's lots of stuff been extracted from that, if you like. My father was a soldier. I come from a long line of military people. So what I'm trying to do, I think, is educate myself as well as the people around me and the people in Ireland and the world about that experience, you know, because it hasn't really been explored. We have soldier poets from all the wars, from all around the world, from other nations and other countries, but it's not really a big thing in Ireland. I'm not a war poet. I'm a soldier who's a poet. So I'm trying to figure out that phrase, if you like, or that term and what it means. I haven't been to a war, but I've been in a place where wars are happening, and I've witnessed them. You know, so I don't know if I'm answering the question correctly.
No, I don't know if there is a right or wrong answer, Michael, but I think it's what you're saying about war and war poets is very interesting, because, you know, the name of your first collection is Peacekeeper.
Yeah.
And it's that side of the work that you do, the peacekeeping role, that seems to me to be very important. A lot of the commentary that you make in the course of the poems on war is it's very anti-war, and it's in the second collection, in the Rules of Engagement, there's you engage with like the whole refugee crisis as well, things like that. So I mean, the place you're coming from is not, to my mind, as a war poet so much as a peacekeeper, I think. But that you can have the last say on that.
Sorry?
You can have the last say on that.
I think I'm trying to be a witness of these things, you know, and tell people about them in my way.
Yeah.
That's what I think I'm doing, you know. So it's poetry of witness or something like that, you know. That's what it is. And you're configured in a way because you have a background before you become a soldier. Your family's, that's the thing, we depend on our families greatly, like, you know. So
sure, yeah. And I mean, I think like all poets are the same. We all kind of our own personal history is really important to what develops in our poetry. and in an ongoing way. Family, your closest relationships are always a kind of a source of your poetry, I think, and no matter what your role in life.
There's so many strands of experience, and it informs you on you all the time what you're doing, you know.
Yeah, just say over the last year has been peculiar for everybody, you know, in many ways with the pandemic and that. And I've just been wondering, like, how you've been, you know, your role in the oral history, as you're saying, of the armed forces and that. I mean, what have you been doing, like, creatively over the course of the year? Did it affect you negatively or positively from a creative point of view?
Well, I think I've had massive waves and troughs over the last year. The oral history and the heritage has been keeping me busy. I've been in work, but I've lost quite a number of friends over the last year. Not all of them passed away from the virus, but they still passed away, and I wasn't there to see them before they went. So that's kind of hurtful, and it has had an impact on me.
Sure.
Even today, I got some bad news about a friend about them. So I'm trying to write, but I can't write on the moment something's happening. I have to absorb the experience before I can do anything about it. How I'm spending my free time is going down to the park, looking at the nature and trying to absorb what's going on there, the birds and the bees and the trees. Like, I love all that kind of stuff. I'm taking photographs and putting them up, and that's informing my thinking and how I'm writing at the moment.
Great. So more stuff will come out at a later time, out of this period, I suppose, as well.
No, that's what you see and say what later on.
That's great stuff. Listen, Michael, we'll leave it at that for the moment. I'm going to ask Christine to read next. I'll just introduce her, and maybe at the end we might have a broader chat again, but thanks very much, Michael. So our next reader is Christine Broe, and Christine has published 2 books of poetry, Solace, Solace and Lifting Light. She's a member of the Rathmines Writers Group. She won the Trokery Poetry Prize in 2019 and was nominated for the Unpost Irish Poems of the Year Award that year as well. Her film, Bog Meditation, about her sculpture and poetry, won an award in Hollywood Independent Film Festival. Get more information on Christine at her website, www.christinebroe.com. So, Christine, if you wouldn't mind.
I'm on.
You're on.
Thank you. That was amazing, Michael. Thank you very much. It's a hard one to follow. And I'm going to start with a poem that's set in this house where I'm sitting here, because in these unusual times, it's not unusual to be working from home, but this is a very old house. It was built in 1855, and there were a lot of people have passed through it since we came here. So this is a poem honouring all those former occupants. Squatters' rights for spiders. The woman who lived in this house before me hugged me and said, "Welcome home." In her kitchen, we drank tea while her weeping silver birch outside the window drooped over winter rhododendrons that pink my winters now. She touched the face carved on the fireplace, his nose worn smooth by her children's goodnight kisses. The woman who lived here before the woman before me rescued swans once from the quarry and kept them here till springtime, nursing them, mending their wings. Maybe took them on long gold chains to swim in the Dodder. What a lovely mythological thing to do. Sometimes winter nights, I see Lear's children step over Lego castles in the firelight. Long shadows on the ceilings, feather dusty Victorian vines. No deeds remembered, no woman's name on deeds, before the woman before me. So many feet climbed upstairs, so many hands opened doors, so many eyes looked through these windows at ancestors of that robin who quizzically now eyes me. As I doze here in sun motes, let dreams and dust settle, leave squatters' rights to spiders, resisting the claim of this house on the woman inside me. From my little bubble here, this is the poem. about people who are displaced from their homes and from their homelands. And this is the poem that was written for the Troker Poetry Competition. It's called The Kerchief. Resting at the border, she brushed the earth from her feet and collected it in an old kerchief. And while her son slept, she scraped the soil from their sandal soles, and this too she added to her treasure. She coaxed the river mud from between the toes of the little ones who twitched in their slumbers, dreaming perhaps of tickles. The other women, sensing her mission, combed the travel dust from their long hair, brushed it from their clothes, and gifted it to her. So light and heavy in her hands she held the earth and airborne essence of their land, and she tied it in a bundle and hung it like a third breast on her chest, taking her homeland with her. When morning came, they crossed the border, and she imagined the apple pip she sucked might be the first seed she would plant in this bag of heavy loss. So, as part of my art practice, I make sculptures from wet bog that I dig from the deepest part I can reach in bog pools. And I was spending a month down in Mayo a few years ago doing that work when the neighbours down there told me this true story. And it's another story about losing home. It's called The Eighth Child. It's in this second collection. Like it only happened yesterday, some people here still talk about a woman who gave birth to her eighth child on the bog. Her family were evicted, not in famine times as I thought, but in the mid-40s. Their house was torched. A man, a woman, and 8 children sheltered under turf banks till good neighbours taking pity helped them build. Got them a cow, which grazed the ditches, and the father trapped song finches, which he sold in little cages before everyone had radios for music in their homes. And all of that family went to live and work in England. But I wonder if their story burns again with every sod that sends its curling smoke into the sky in remembrance of that miracle, a bog child wrapped in sphagnum moss, who all her long life was called baby. So, to follow that theme about difficult experiences, both outside and inside the country, this is a personal poem, and it was written 16 years after this happened, and I just thought of it again watching a recent documentary on T.G. Cahir where Sheila Shioga did a program about miscarriage. So this poem is called Naming the Sorrow. Long years I wished for you, wanted you, willed you, and every moon month raged and wept when disappointment flowed. And then at last your golden beat was pulsing in my darkness, making me so secret and so whole. 12 weeks, a white fish with big black eyes, I held you, baptizing you in a river of tears till they took you away. I called, I would have called you Alice. So this next poem has a sculpture to go with it, and I'm going to try and show it to you on the screen, so I don't know if you'll be able to see it or not. It's one of the bog sculptures. It's of a couple holding the baby. and it's quite wet. It's only recently made, a couple of weeks old. It will get, it'll shrink and become, you know, half or 1/3 of the size there, and I'm hoping it'll hold together while it does that. And I've asked Brian to foster the second verse here.
I will, of course, yeah.
This is only the third poem I've written since the lockdown. But it's a poem that's been in gestation for years. Since I discovered the word for an adopted child in Irish is ucht lanav. And ucht is a sort of gender non-specific term. It can be a chest or a breast. And I just think it's the perfect word for a child, because even a child you give birth to, first thing you do is lift it up and hold it. And I mean, I'm addicted to watching these adoption programs because I love to watch the people hugging. So the one thing we're not allowed to do for the last year. So the whole, you know, gripping nature of it. So it's called Ucht Lanav. This warm and breathing bundle, I held him to my breast, closed my arms around him, a child not of my own womb, a gift that came of sorrow, my Ucht Lanav.
I clutched them both against my chest, vowed to love them till last breath. My love, her tears now blessing the new life in her arms that came to us from sorrow, to fill our hearts with joy, our Ucht Lanav.
Thank you.
Beautiful stuff. Thank you, Christine.
That's me.
That's brilliant.
Thanks
Thanks very much. That was a lovely reading, and I was just looking back through Lifting Light last week, just reading through some of the poems again, just remembering them, and just I kind of got a sense again of the change in the tone of the book as it moves through, and it becomes very family oriented towards the end. And I think that's a lovely ending. It's like a blossoming out of the poems. A lot of the poems at the start are very short, and they're short lines and that. So you're saying you only wrote about 3 poems during the last year, Christine, yeah? But you're still doing your bog sculptures and your artwork as well, though.
Yeah, I'm doing a lot of art. I've written exactly 3 poems. The first one was another entry into the Troker competition that was written with the same kind of format as the one I read, the Kerchief. It's about women and their sort of the archetypal nature of women. That's getting into too much of an art therapy thing.
But I mean, that kind of theme is in Lifting Light as well, that idea of motherhood and intergenerational relationships as well is in Lifting Light as well. And it was interesting what you said about the sculpture that you showed us. How you as you said, you put your hand into the bog. Maybe you could talk about the way you create those sculptures a bit more.
Yeah, well, it's a weird thing, and it starts off with the art therapy, because when I was studying down in Cork, we had this Englishman who had retired to the West Cork, and he brought in to the college one day a big tub of wet mud from the bog, and he threw it on a big plastic thing on the floor and said, "See what you make out of that." And I made a woman out of it. It's one of the poems in the book, Bog Woman. And I thought, you know, I need to spend the rest of my life doing this. I was absolutely, you know, fascinated or passionate about it. Really, I couldn't explain how the effect it had on me. So anytime we were near bog then, I used to try and find a bit where it was cut away and as far down as I could go, and then reach down into it always hoping I didn't shake hands with one of the bog fellas down and dredge up all this mud. And I have, it never smells. I have stuff like for over the year in basins and things around the shed. And I just squeeze it until it takes on the shape I want.
Right, yeah.
So,
I've seen the short film that I mentioned in your bio there is worth watching if anybody gets a chance to see it, because you show people actually engaging in the process, and it's a real community effort or a group effort as well.
It was a fascinating thing because it was made under the auspices of the Irish Film Institute and the Bealtaine people, and we made it all in one Saturday. The whole thing, no funding, no, that we've just put the whole thing together, and it went in. Glenda Cimino was the driving force behind it. She is the director. She's got it placed in a festival in Bali now that's going to be in December. So what the Bali people make out of bog,
That's brilliant, Christine. That's really good.
Yeah. But they take on a life of their own, you see, as they're disintegrating. It's like the portrait of Dorian Gray, like, they grow old.
Yeah, that's what you're saying. Because they're so moist, is it, as they dry out, they become smaller?
Yeah, they do. Yeah. They condense.
And do their features change then slightly as well?
Yeah, they make all sorts of weird faces.
Okay, all right. It's really interesting. But in terms of at the moment, sort of in terms from a poetry point of view, are you just leaving it aside and waiting for the inspiration to strike, or are you kind of still making notes or seeking poems or anything like that?
No, I never. I wait for them.
You wait for them, yeah.
Seeking me.
Yeah. But I suppose, as Michael was saying, nature is the thing that we tend to kind of return to when we need a break ourselves as individuals in life, but also, I suppose, as a fount for inspiration for poems as well. A lot of people I found talking to them over the last year kind of were obviously out and about in nature more than they would be, because there was very little else to do, so people were going to their parks, or when they could travel, they were going to the beach, or they were going to the mountains, or so that's kind of where you'd be going anyway, I presume, in terms of your art as well.
No, well, I do a lot of painting and crayon work and all sorts of mixed media stuff, but I never wrote about nature really much. It's more what Michael was talking about, witnessing life and process. But like, I was conscious when he was saying putting things like into a container, the poem becomes a container for that emotion, and that can be revisited by yourself or by anyone who reads the poem. So I'd be more like, it's more therapy with me, both the art and the poetry, witnessing my own life and witnessing those lives around me. And yeah, I have written poems about nature, like, who do I thank for the spider's webs hanging down the trees and the dodder and stuff like that, but not much.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I know there's poems, and I mean, when you do write about nature, I think in Lifting Light, it is about there's the river is there, and the bog is obviously there as well, and I think the kingfisher is there in one of them as well. And, so and those kind of striking images, all right. But but I suppose as a kind of as a therapy for us all, we've all been using nature.
Oh yeah.
Just to get through the time that we're living through at the minute. Yeah.
Because it's changing while the whole world is changing. Like, the birds don't know we're having a pandemic.
Yeah, and that was really apparent last year, I think, when in the first kind of lockdown, when absolutely everything was closed, and there was a new level of silence, because there was no factories running, there was no machines, there was very little traffic. And I know myself that bird song suddenly, I'm sure it must have been there all the time, but it just became really apparent and very much louder than we ever experienced it before, or it appeared that way, you know. But it was probably just because of the absence of all the other background noise in our lives, you know.
It's like the truth. You can mute people.
It's a similar thing. We put the world on mute, but
Yeah.
it's affected us all in different ways, I suppose. But Christine, thanks very much for that. I think what I'll do is I'll move on. I'll read a few poems now, and then maybe at the end, if Michael or yourself have anything that you want to add or throw into the mix, we'll sum up or round up from there. So thanks again, Christine. They were lovely poems. I'm going to do a short reading now, just a few poems, and I suppose I better introduce myself. I'm Kirk. I'm a poet and writer from Clondalkin in Dublin, and my first collection, After the Fall, was published by Salmon Poetry in 2017, and my poem Birthday won the Unpost Irish Book Award Poem of the Year in 2018. Now, the poems I'm going to read are poems that are all written, I suppose, within the last year. I took on to write a sequence of formal poems about the COVID pandemic. And because I suppose I got an Arts Council bursary to write them, and I suppose that was an impetus to actually do it and produce the work, because I felt I had to once I'd kind of been awarded it. So I tried to engage with the pandemic as best I could in writing these formal poems. And the thinking was that the poems themselves, because of their formal nature and the constraints within the form, that it would somehow reflect the lives that we're all having to live at the moment under our own constraints and the restraints of the pandemic. So I tried, I suppose one of the first ones I wrote was a villanelle, which is a kind of a form that I'd written before and that most people are familiar with. So I'll read that one first. It's called Staying Home. Churches vacant, the public houses closed, families forced to make some conversation. Monday morning, not a sinner on the road to work or school. Empty buses break, unload dead air that might be carrying contagion. Churches vacant, the public houses closed. You hide in plain sight in your own abode. Remove your homely self to your workstation. It's Monday morning, not a sinner on the road. And that report you promised won't upload. You calculate percent of population. Church is vacant. The public house is closed. The things you knew for certain now unknown. Faith to doubt to boredom, concatenation. Monday again. Not a sinner on the road. Why would there be? The speed of life has slowed to a limp, a dying generation. Church is vacant. The public house is closed. Monday morning, not a sinner on the road. So that was one of the early ones, and then I thought I'd move on and I wrote a couple of sonnets because I was kind of familiar with that form, and then and the next one I wrote then would have been a sestina. I'd written a couple of sestinas before, and this one I wrote as the summer wore on, and we had very good weather last year, particularly at the start of it, and with the hot weather and there being stuck in the house and in the garden, it was kind of, there was that kind of area where dreams and reality kind of began to blend, and you didn't know whether you were coming or going. So this poem, I suppose, came out of that. And the repetition of words within the sestina seemed to fit the time we were living through during that summer as well, last summer. So this is called Dog Days. Summer came scampering into the house this year, uncalled for, dragging garden smells on muddy paws, and a new silence coloured by a yellow, ever-present sun that threatened but never delivered storms. On humid nights, you were visited in dreams by memories of failure, the unfulfilled dreams of your youth. You cowered while the house held its breath, in expectation of a storm that never came. Something stirred in the garden. Orion's dog slept under his shade in the sun, tongue lolling, his breath breaking the silence, laboured, hoarse, excavating the silence of your mind, making room for more dreams, vague anxieties fostered under a glaring sun. You grew accustomed to being prisoner in your house, The known world extended to the bottom of the garden, no further. But the TV brought you closer to the storm and drang of peoples tearing each other apart. Storms in teacups to you who measured out each day in silence. Heat spilled out the open windows into the garden, searing the grass, choking flowers while you dozed, dreaming of disease, death, and decay consuming the house. Outside it was worse, speared under a burning sun, unable to pretend that everything was normal, to sun yourself and watch the skies, wait for the storm to pass. Your impatience could not be housed by an absence that knew no other form but silence. Worse than sleeping was the waking dream, finding yourself alone and standing in the garden, looking around, naming what you see, garden, grass, trees, bent flowers dying under the hot sun, knowing you haven't been away, just in a dream, wishing to hell that something would change, the storm might break, the children next door might assault the silence. After a while you give up, go back inside the house. After this summer of silences, you were primed to storm the garden's barricades and reach up to pull the sun down out of the sky into your fever dreams, your hollow house. So that was kind of the midsummer, late summer, long days and kind of beginning to be a bit uneasy. And I suppose the next poem is about the change in the seasons, and I suppose as they're perceived when in this peculiar year as well. And there is, I suppose, for this poem, there is that alignment with nature and trying to kind of hold on to kind of the regularity of the natural cycle, or to find something in that to keep you going. And this is called letting go. In May, you threw good money after bad, food, shoes, a magic pen that wipes out stains. Too long at home, uncertain, somewhat sad, watch days drift by through dusty window panes. Distracted for a while by phone, iPad, how like a battery concentration drains. A new way has arrived and you endure with little choice, distracted and unsure. The summer passed and nothing seemed to change. You formed a bond with absence. Now distance became the calculus of safety's range. Stumbling on the path of least resistance when you moved at all, denying how strange the world had grown, proceeding in a trance, no longer able to remember when you dreamed you had your old life back again. September came, October following. You opened up your eyes as from a sleep and saw the dancing trees were fallowing, oak, blackthorn, ash, elm, juniper and beech, red, gold and bronze, the green leaf yellowing to white. You understood such beauty cannot keep. The trees, despite their agitation, also know these colours are a sign they must let go. I'm going to finish just with a poem. It's just a series of rhyming couplets, really, and this is this is something I kind of noticed, and I think a lot of people commented on during the pandemic, is how, despite the fact that we were all separated so much and couldn't interact the way we'd like to, but there was a sort of a bigger, a greater sense of community going on somehow, despite all this isolation. And that kind of stuck with me. And I called the poem here metaxu, which is a word I came across that the philosopher Simone Weil uses. And it's a kind of one of these paradoxical phrases. It's the idea that the thing that separates us also connects us. So that's what metaxu is. So this poem is the last one anyway. It's called Metaxu. These days of plague are passing rich and strange. We wrestle with the notion of sea change. Not long ago, our lives seemed so much better than the lives of those before us. Yet our parents and our grandparents survived hard times, famine, revolution, gun and sword. Our business is transacted via Zoom. The things we took for granted are the same things that will make us ill. The hugs and handshakes, breaths of strangers, a touch is all it takes to pass it on. So we must stay apart. make of ourselves a temple or a fort, protecting loved ones in the only way we can, hoping to keep disease at bay. All year, we've tried to live like nothing's wrong, pretending we know what's really going on. In our worst moments, we give in to doubt, a rat caught in a maze with no way out. The wall between what's needed and what's fair is deep, a solid structure made of air. We loathe the way it seems to drive a wedge, marvel how it can also build a bridge. Okay, well, that's my part in the proceedings there. So maybe if I can just come back to the two of you guys and just say, kind of round up, if we can round up on what we think about, like where we are poetically at the moment or creatively at the moment. And bearing in mind the theme, I suppose, for Poetry Day Ireland is new directions, maps and journeys. And maybe it's a time for all of us, I suppose, to be considering where we're going next or where we go from here. Maybe Michael, you might tell us maybe what your immediate plans are. Like, I mean, I know you've had 2 collections out. Are you consciously working towards a 3rd collection now, or are you just writing poems or seeing what comes to you and seeing how it develops at this stage?
A little bit of all of that, I think, you know. Yeah. I know it's been a few years since the last collection, and probably next year I'll have to come up with something. So I am starting to constantly work towards that, and I'm putting stuff together. But you know, you put it on a paper and then you go back to it a few weeks later and you're revising it. So there's nothing jumping out at me for a theme at the moment.
Yeah.
But I am writing stuff down, you know. So I have a collection over there, and I just, as you were reading there, I was thinking there's one I should have read earlier, because I turned 50 last June in the middle of the pandemic, and it was quite emotional. It was quite an emotional day because there was no one around to celebrate with, you know. But
yeah,
I felt very vulnerable throughout the year, and especially when I turned 50.
Yeah.
I know people are saying that's quite young and all that, you know, but it is a big.
It's a milestone, as they say, isn't it? You know. And was that just last week or recently?
Last June, so I'll be 51 in this June. You know,
okay.
So. And I can't believe how quick that year has gone.
Yeah, in some ways it's been very quick, but in some ways it seems interminable.
Yeah.
Well, but Christine, what are you? I mean, you're saying you've only written a small number of poems, so, and you were saying you're waiting for the poems to come to you. So that's kind of where you're at the minute, right?
Yeah, I admire the way you were able to write in the midst of the pandemic and to record it like at the cold front.
Yeah.
And maybe you know, I couldn't do what you do. I mean, I couldn't write poems like that had a name before they started, like a song.
I'm very conscious of it, to be honest, Christian. I'm very worried about it. I think history may not be kind to me when they look back at some. I think these kind of poems that are written very much, you know, without too much reflection or without too much distance, can be sometimes, it can go awry. But no, I take the point. It's something I just felt compelled to do, and it kept me busy as well. You know?
Well, there's 2 things there. I mean, I think one of the things that holds us all together in this kind of a siege situation is ritual and routine.
Yeah.
And like if you have a grid to put your thoughts in, you know, your immediate thoughts, I think that's helpful. And also, I've written a lot of poems while my mother had Alzheimer's, and all of those poems, like, I would deny I ever felt like that. Looking, if I was writing those retrospectively, I wouldn't have been able to harness the anger or the sadness or the humor, or, you know, because they were written in the heat of the moment. And I think what you're doing is very useful.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's coming out of a different place, I suppose, than some poems.
Sorry, Michael.
Sorry, can I just come in on something there? I was just listening to you there, Brian, and as you were reading, I was thinking of the poems of Witness, like, and you've come at a different slant on it, but it reminded me of the war poets from the First World War who were chronicling something that was happening there, and we look at that period through the poets who were writing about it at the time, and it's happened for 100 years. But I think what you've written about the pandemic there, my historian's hat on, will be relevant to people in the 15, 16, 100 years time, because they'll be getting an avenue, a vista into this pandemic through what you've written there from an Irish side of things. But so there is, you're chronicling something. And then I was thinking about Christine's, what she was doing there, and the amount of emotion in what Christine, especially that second poem, the one where you were describing, I think it was the Troker one, your reference to the Troker, the amount of emotion, and that I was nearly getting palpitations listening to it. But
it's a marvelous poem. That
but both of them are powerful. Both sides of that, the juxtaposition there is powerful, like, you know.
Mm.
Also, Christine, I know you didn't read it, but your other poem that I think was shortlisted or runner-up in the Troker the following year, the Wellwater, that's another marvelous poem as well.
It's a similar poem, really.
Yeah.
But
it's similar kind of thematically. It's similar, all right. It's wonderful work as well. So I mean, as they say, as the politicians say, we are where we are. So we will hopefully find our new directions, and we will go on these journeys of the imagination or whatever. Whether they, or maybe hopefully even in the future we might get to physically go on journeys again. But I suppose that now is a good time for me to say, listen, thanks very much to both of you, to Christine and to Michael. I loved hearing your work. It was really, really good. I'm sure the people who are listening in today will enjoy it equally as much. And so I just want to say thanks again to both of you. Thanks to South Dublin Libraries. Libraries are a great service to all of us, more so than ever, I think, and they continue to do great work, and we all appreciate that. I know that, and I know the people looking in feel the same about that. So it just remains for me to say thanks once again, and enjoy the rest of Poetry Day Ireland 2021. Thank you.
Great to see you, boys.